Hello, and welcome to the Legal Marketing Brief, the series where we showcase attorneys from across the country and learn about the strategies they use to market successful practices. I'm John Simpson, CEO of Convert Marketing. Today, we're sitting down with Richard Seff. Richard is an estate planning lawyer in Los Angeles with an interesting path to helping families protect their assets. Today, Richard shares his approach to creating successful outcomes for his clients and his business. So with that, we hope you enjoy our discussion with Richard. Well, Richard, one of the questions we always love to ask our participants in the Legal Marketing Brief is, how did you become a lawyer? And I understand that you have a fairly interesting path to this profession. You want to tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, well, I actually started out as a social worker back in Baltimore where I grew up. And I worked with families, mainly acting out teenagers and helping parents deal with them. And then while I was doing that, I went to school part-time to George Washington University, where I got another master's degree in healthcare administration. And then I became a hospital administrator. I was able to set up a really progressive, cutting-edge kind of unit for working with dementia and Alzheimer's. So I learned a lot about that, which is invaluable to what I do now. And then I got a job at Desert Hospital in Palm Springs, and that's when I moved from Baltimore. And then at the ripe old age of 36, I decided to go to law school. So I went to Southwestern University because they have a unique 2-year full-time program. It's intense, but I got to my goal quicker. And then I chose estate planning as my specialty because it resonated with me because you're working with families, really. That's my story.
Well, let's break that down a little bit because that is definitely probably one of the most interesting paths that we've heard in doing these interviews with other lawyers. If you think about starting your career as a social worker, what are the attributes that you think a social worker and an estate plan lawyer share when you look back at those two professions?
Well, that's a really good question. I think improves my ability in interacting with clients because I understand families all too well. So I may be asking questions that other attorneys won't. I often get feedback from clients that when they were looking for an attorney, one of the things that attracted them to me was the fact that I had been a social worker. So they assume I have some degree of empathy. Sometimes when you go right to law school out of undergraduate, you're a bit robotic. Some attorneys are a bit intellectual and robotic and don't realize that in speaking legalese, that clients rarely understand it. And that's another bit of feedback I get from clients. They thank me profusely for explaining things in a way that they can understand it, so that I simplify it for me. So those are all the ways that social work has helped me.
Yeah, it seems to me that there's an approachability around a social worker that I think would lend itself to the estate planning profession, right? I mean, you're planning your nest egg, you're planning generations ahead of you, and that's obviously a very personal matter. Finding somebody who is approachable and has been through these things. And I think another important thing you mentioned there is being able to see around corners, right? You've seen how families work as a social worker, and you might be able to spot things that in family dynamics and so forth that somebody else might not, another lawyer.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, it's not uncommon that a child may have a drug abuse problem and they don't want to talk about it. So I always inquire about their kids and how they're doing and what they're up to, because it's critical to know that maybe a child who inherits a great deal of money won't be able to manage it properly. If they have a drug problem, look out. So then we get into discussions of better ways of handling that through special needs trust or trust set up for them where someone else is managing it for them.
Got it. So you're a social worker, you're a hospital administrator, you go back to law school. When you came out of law school, did you practice with another firm or do you immediately become a solo practitioner entrepreneur at that point?
Good question. No, actually, I went to work for a small boutique firm that specialized in estate planning because I have to learn the craft, right? So And I did. They were excellent attorneys, but I noticed some problems that I wanted to avoid when I did start my own practice. Number one, at that time, and this was 1990, they charged by the hour a lot, which is a disincentive for clients to spend much time in the fancy conference room trying to understand their estate plan. So they assume it's done. I can scratch it off the list. I'll put this fancy binder in the safe or somewhere and forget about it. And the firm wasn't great at follow-up with existing clients. The problem with that is things change through time. Finances change, relationships change, and we all know the law changes. So when I started my own firm, I decided, number one, I do flat fees so they don't have to worry. They don't have to look at the clock. And that includes phone calls. I just don't do billing. Secondly, I build a maintenance plan into the package. What I mean by that is we can have checkups every few years, my time free, just to see what's going on. So I check those things, and sometimes circumstances in their family have changed, and they don't realize it impacts their estate plan. So I catch that. The third component is keep them educated if they want. So I offer a monthly digital newsletter that hits important topics that might be relevant to them. And
no, it makes total sense. I love the idea of the package that includes, the maintenance hours, because just speaking personally, I developed our, trust and estate plan in 2016. Our family looked very different at that time. Our circumstances probably looked a little bit different, and I'm sure the law has changed a lot in the last 8 years here in Illinois. So I can see that would be a huge benefit to a client. Speaking of that, obviously things change over time, so forth. Can you talk a little bit about the scope of your overall practice?
Sure.
Elder law and so forth.
So, we start with the foundational estate plan, what most everyone needs if they have nothing. So that would include, and most people do a living trust instead of a will, so that their loved ones don't have to deal with courts and probate. That's why people do living trusts. So it's the living trust and the ancillary documents. So that's what I call the foundational plan. But we can get more sophisticated depending on what they want. So I also have asset protection planning. These are for people who are in high-risk occupations, for example. Physicians, people who own rental property, right? So we can establish entities and different kinds of trusts that provide them asset protection so no one can go after them personally. And then we have estate tax planning. It's rare today that you need estate tax planning.
Let me switch gears for a second here. So when you're at your best, how would your clients describe you?
When I'm at my best, they appreciate my informal, friendly manner. I really get to know them. Attention to details. Appreciation of clear explanations. I think that's the kind of feedback I really appreciate.
Oh, I'm sure. It's funny. I was a long time ago sitting in a general counsel panel where they had general counsel talking about when they hired outside lawyers, what did they look for? And interestingly enough, one of the general counsel said, I have no idea if John Simpson's a good lawyer, but he's great at knowing what I need and getting done what I need done in a way that I really like. They didn't obviously weren't using my name, but the point being that, there's so much more to law than just the practice of it, right? It's the bedside manner that goes with it. And
exactly.
With your background, that's going to be an asset to you. Well, let's switch gears. I want to ask you, this is a question that we ask everybody that joins us, because what we found is that there are many different things that make lawyers tick. And they have different definitions of what we would call success. I mean, certainly there are monetary objectives and so forth and building a practice. But sometimes when we ask this question, we get interesting answers. So I wanted to ask you, when you think about your practice, what is success to you?
Solving a difficult problem that clients face, whether it be estate taxes, whether it be disability and qualifying for Medi-Cal, dealing with a difficult family situation, alleviating that.
And so
That's success.
can I double click on that, Richard, and ask you, so if it's solving these challenging situations, for you, is it, and this is not a binary answer, but I'm going to ask it anyways, is it working through a challenging problem and the intellectual simulation that goes through that? Is it more the outcome for the client that drives you in that situation, which is why you define it as your version of success? What do you get out of solving a difficult problem? What's of most enjoyment to you?
Solving the problem, having clients happy they met with me, because it makes all the difference. I mean, I'll have that family meeting.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's right. I mean, oftentimes I'm guessing you're not just meeting with an individual or a couple. You could be meeting with an entire family in the room, witnessing the dynamics of how everything goes down.
Yeah, so one of my goals is designing an estate plan that enhances their legacy after they're gone. And no one wants to leave a legacy of unhappy beneficiaries who end up fighting, because greed rears its ugly head when it comes to these matters. You might be seeing people at their worst.
Absolutely. So when folks come to you, maybe when you get that first call from a prospective client, what are some of the misconceptions people have about estate planning?
Well, I know there's probably going to be a problem when the first question is, how much? And the misconception is one trust is like any other trust, and the only difference being price. And if that's the case, then you should go for the lowest. But it's not the case. Not every trust is alike. I make the analogy or the metaphor to cars. They both get you from point A to point B, but, my Hyundai is very different from a Mercedes. I let them know they're in a BMW parking lot. Well, you have to look under the hood of the trust to see what's in there. You can get it very cheaply. There are trust mills, right? You won't have much contact with an attorney, and they're bare bones, and they don't deal with complicated issues, such as what happens when you become disabled. What happens if a beneficiary is in a not-so-great marriage, and they're going to inherit a lot? And then if there's a divorce, are they going to be able to get half that inheritance? So I got solutions to those things. And you're not going to see that with the bare bones trust.
Makes sense. Hey,
so it's what you don't know what you don't know.
So follow-on question I wanted to ask was, all right, so the first question is, how much is this going to cost me? I understand why it's not the right question. It's sort of like asking, how much does it cost for you to build me a house? Well, how many bedrooms you want, and so forth. In your mind, if you were contacting an estate planning lawyer to write up an estate plan for yourself, and you weren't doing it for yourself, what do you think the first question would be that you would ask?
How long have you been practicing? What's your experience? What's their background? Reviews, online reviews are powerful.
Really? So that's a great segue to the last topic, which is I want to talk about marketing. So can you talk just in general about how you think about marketing and business development? So how does work come to Richard Seff?
Surprisingly, most of it comes from the online world. Social media, website, reviews on Google and other sites. That drives a lot of traffic to me.
How long have you been leveraging the digital world, and how long has it been producing for your business?
And years. Back in the olden days, you had to do a lot of networking, which bored me so much. The digital world and how it's become more sophisticated revolutionized my practice. It really did. And it's made all the difference.
That's wonderful to hear. And if you had to say like the top three things, you've already mentioned a few, but the top three things that you think work well as a part of your marketing strategy online, what would those be?
Reviews, reviews, reviews. That's number one. Secondly, posting interesting articles on Google that bring them back to your website or a landing page. That's really it.
Yeah. And how do you go about sourcing the reviews from your clients? Is that a regular part of your conversation when you wrap up a matter with a client, for example?
I pick and choose. Probably should be a regular part. I've got to improve that. I got to work on that. But I do have a lot of good reviews.
Yeah, isn't it amazing? I once we were doing some research for a presentation we were doing here at CIT, and I found a stat, and I might have this not exactly right, Richard, but the stat was that people trust an anonymous review online more than they trust a referral from an ex-boyfriend or girlfriend.
I believe it.
It just goes to show you, I think maybe 15, 20 years ago when we started to see online reviews on Amazon, you kind of didn't know what they were all about. What's the agenda of this person that's writing the online review? Whereas today, I would say that virtually every purchase I make, I'm looking at the reviews, even for high-end services, like estate planning and so forth.
Absolutely.
So, if you were advising a younger attorney who was getting into this practice, or maybe an attorney that had been practicing for a while but was deciding to go out on their own, what advice would you give them? What would you tell them to do? And then what would you tell them not to do based on your experience?
I would tell them to get with a good expert in social media and websites and SEO and all of that. I would tell them to get with a very good platform that provides their documents, because you often get a listserv and you get to communicate with attorneys throughout the country. And you have this community and you're not alone. Take all of their workshops and webinars. That's the key, because you'll learn so much. So those two things is what I'd recommend.